John Paul Gutschke. Welcome to Power and Witness, our podcast. We had you on the show and talking about film and your recent work, The Promise. So just wanted to further the discussion, and I know you're 22 years old. You're going to begin your last year at Christendom, and you're majoring in philosophy, and you studied a lot in your classes on Aristotle. And what did he have to say about beauty?
So Aristotle talks about the importance of imitation in art. So in his work, The Poetics, he talks a lot about how, art really imitates life, and everything in art, particularly stories, it's about portraying the human quest for happiness. It's a portrayal, it's an imitation of our human journey as we seek for longing and as we long for fulfillment and seek that happiness and final resting place of our actions, what he would call the telos of our actions, the ultimate end of our actions. And then you have St. Thomas Aquinas come along and build upon what Aristotle said, and he describes that beauty has three components: wholeness, harmony, and radiance. And the wholeness is the fittingness of the entirety of the work of art, so it has to be complete. The harmony is the parts that fit together. They have to all work together in unison well, and the radiance is the splendor, the beauty that comes out, that truth that comes out in a very powerful way in the work of art. And that's what makes a work of art beautiful, having those three elements of wholeness, harmony, and radiance.
And like wholeness doesn't mean like symmetry, where you have this perfect symmetry. Because I remember we've got this screensaver that it's like a Japanese maple, like that would grow along a stream or something, and it's very asymmetrical.
Right.
But it's absolutely beautiful.
Right.
And I was trying to think, what is the wholeness there? How do you describe that wholeness?
So the wholeness would be just the fact that it is complete and entire. It's not missing something that it needs in order to feel like it reached its perfection. It just has everything that it needs in order to be beautiful. Like if you chopped it in half, probably would not be beautiful in the same way anymore. Yeah. But it's not that wholeness has to be like a certain type of order. It just has to be ordered according to the thing that it is. So if it's a beautiful willow tree, it has to have the parts of the willow tree to make it that willow tree and make it lovely according to its specific way of being.
Yeah. Would it have to be symmetrical, maybe along a different axis? Oftentimes we just think of like a vertical axis, but if you had maybe like a horizontal axis, does it have to be symmetry to it? Or?
I mean, there has to be some amount of order and proportion, so that whatever the work of art is, or whether it be something that humans make, or whether it be something in nature, there has to be a certain proportionality to it. But it really depends on the specific thing.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading about beauty not that long ago, and I remember, you could think, like all things that God makes has a beauty to it, right? And so just being itself has beauty. But he also teaches, I think, that it's also like, does the beauty serve? Like if you look at our inner organs, they're not necessarily beautiful in the sense of something that you would look upon. It's fitting that you look upon a tree that has beauty. It's not fitting that you look upon my liver and say that it has like a beauty to it. You could say, yeah, there's some beauty of being an organ or whatever. But I thought that was a great distinction. It's like, it's almost like, and I don't know if he says this, but it's almost like, who's going to see this? You think of like those deep fish that maybe have the luminosity feature to it or something. And they look like these horrible monsters, And I remember fishing one time in Florida with some friends, and we were pulling up these redfish, and it just struck me as so beautiful. It's like they were like the tops of them just had this wonderful reddish pink and the white underbelly.
Right.
And I remember the first time I saw it when we pulled it up, it just blew me away. And but yet you go much deeper, it gets ugly down there.
Right.
So there's I guess there's a beauty to things that are visible. And
right. There's an ontological beauty to things, which means that they are beautiful insofar as they exist. They're beautiful insofar as they're there. They're in front of you. They have being, as a philosopher would say. And since God creates all things, everything that he makes is good, and therefore everything that he makes is beautiful, because beautiful and good are two words to look at the same truth, but different aspects of it. So good, true, and beautiful are all kind of synonymous. It's looking at the same thing, but different aspects of the same thing, almost like the facets of a gem. And when you have something that's ontologically beautiful, it's beautiful because it's there. And then the aesthetic beauty, which is more what we're talking about in relation to art, that is where those three facets of beauty, the wholeness, the harmony, and radiance, they all come into play, because there's a bit more emphasis on the parts working together in harmony, the wholeness being there, the thing being complete in itself. It doesn't need anything added or taken away from it in order for it to be beautiful and pleasing, and for it to have that radiance, that ability to convey truth in a brilliant way that just kind of shines forth some goodness, some aspect of reality that makes us think.
Yeah. And also, I mean, so the radiance or the claritas,
that's the Latin for it.
Latin, it's that it could be visual, right?
Right.
Like with bright colors. I think, like Michelangelo supposedly used very bright colors, I think, Sistine Chapel. And
right.
I don't know if it's true that if he designed the Swiss Guard uniforms or not, but that's certainly bright colored and everything. But yeah, I was walking up at the shrine, and it had this beautiful blue sky, and like they have green grass around it and stuff, and white clouds, and it just struck me as something so simple, commonplace, but so beautiful. If we pause and look at it. But especially, it seemed like things get our attention that have like vivid, bright colors.
That's true.
Yeah.
St. Thomas talks about the brightness of color really kind of being an example of that claritas or splendor, because it's just so immediately striking to the eye. And like that's why we like objects that are shiny, that are magnificent, and have this brilliance and reflectiveness and just a vibrancy to them. It really allows us to see God in it. It allows us to wonder at nature and what nature has to offer as the creation of God, the Creator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember on my Instagram, I started following this jewel Instagram account, and it was just, they would have like, they weren't placed in a setting, but they would just have like these jewels they'd show every, I don't know, I guess they're selling them or something, but it just struck me as so beautiful. I remember one time I saw this ruby that wasn't in a setting, but when the sunlight shone on it, it just had like a depth, a richness to the color that was mesmerizing.
Right.
It's like, and you think of like well done stained glass, the colors there are so beautiful. And so how do we say, like, art imitates life? Is that the saying? How does that go?
Yes. So art is very much an imitation. It's called in more philosophical terms, mimesis. Mimesis is imitation, and in art it's typically imitation of human action in some way or another. So you see in music, you feel that sense of longing for the transcendent. For example, if you listen to Mozart's Ave Verum, you feel that sense of God is something greater that our hearts are stretching out to love and be united with. In great films, you have a sense of our quest for happiness as you follow specific characters in a time and place and a setting, and that in that specificity, and you have this person at this time in this location, when you follow those characters as they make choices and as you see their journey unfold, it's really telling us something universally true about human nature, about our lives, and about our common shared quest to be truly happy and fulfilled as human beings.
Would Thomas say that then, that God makes beauty to draw, ultimately he's beauty itself, to
Yes.
draw us to himself?
Yes, I believe so. He is ultimate beauty. He is the source of all beauty in creation, either through the natural world, the trees, the birds, the sky, the clouds, the water, the seas, or whether it be man, the jewel of creation, and the beauty of human beings, the smile, true love and friendship, the human person, as the most beautiful example of God's creation, but also in what we create, because we take what God has given us and we sub-create, and in so doing, we're giving sort of a gift back to God and using our rational capacity, because we are made in the image and likeness of God. And when we create works of art, we're really doing something that's in imitation of our Creator. We're doing something in imitation of God, saying, you gave us this stuff to work with, and now we can give it back to you as a gift, using our ability to think and make sense out of it and put order and design into it. And then when we hand it back to God as a gift, it's a really wonderful thing that's so specifically human.
Yeah, and I think too, Thomas, I think it was Thomas that said, like, the natural world and the beauty therein is like God's first word to us.
Right.
It's a revelation of himself. So he's trying to draw us to the Maker and the one who made this and create and sustains all this. And I think too that the beauty in the natural world especially speaks to us and nurtures us. I think like walking outside in the woods or something, just being a natural beauty nurtures us in a special way. I mean, growing up, I was a Boy Scout and hiker and loved the woods and all this stuff. But I know, like, during COVID, I just started taking more wood walks outside. And a lot of it was just to kind of relax. It was a stressful time with different stuff going on. And I found it very calming and restorative.
Yes.
More, I don't know. I guess some man-made art certainly is beautiful and everything, but it seemed like the natural world has a special pride of place there to some degree.
Oh, it's definitely very lovely, because it's what God created specifically for us himself. So it's not even something that we make and give back to God. It's something that God directly made. And it's really like his fingerprint. In nature, we see God indirectly. And when we contemplate, when we're trying to know God, when we're trying to behold the beauty and the goodness, that just the awesome wonder of our Creator, when we're trying to think about that and reflect upon it, which is called contemplation, when we're trying to do that, to understand, to just behold the goodness and beauty of our Creator, we do this initially through seeing him through his effects. So when we see the tree that God created, it's an effect of God. God is the cause. He created the tree as an effect. And as we see that, the order and splendor of the tree, we're like, wow, that's so wonderful. It points us back to the Creator of all things. And that's why, like you were saying, nature is such a wonderful and rich ability to put us back in touch with God as the Creator, and to foster that relationship and ability to love and understand God ultimately.
Yeah. And does Thomas, you mentioned the heart earlier. I don't know if y'all read much of Dietrich von Hildebrand, but he talks. Oh, you have?
A bit, yes.
Yeah, he talks a lot about the heart and its importance. But it seems like, I think Thomas says something like it gives pleasure, like beauty gives pleasure when it is seen or when it's in the sense.
Yes,
experience.
that which seen pleases.
Pleases, yeah. But there's something though too, like seemingly like on an even deeper level, that we're moved by it.
Right.
It could be moved to tears.
Right.
That it's like, what is going on there? What is that?
Right.
Does Aristotle say anything about that? Or Thomas? Or?
Yes, I believe Thomas, probably even more so than Aristotle, would have an understanding of the human heart in a way that's in conformity with the description the Catechism will often draw upon, the biblical sense of the heart, which is the center of the person. It's both emotion and reason fused together in a well-formed character, this movement of the innermost depths of a person's being at truth, at love, at this beauty that God provides and is the source and summit of. And the human heart is moved at its innermost depths and when encountering this type of beauty, because it's what we're made for. We're ultimately made for love and communion. And when we see when we see nature, when we see God's effects, we feel the love of our Creator, and it moves us more than anything else because we feel that connection with God, who's our ultimate longing. We ultimately long for God as our final end and our ultimate satisfaction.
Yeah, I read one writer, I don't know if he took this from Thomas, but he talked about like the surprising aspect of it, and that personal thing that you experience this like as a gift from our Creator. Like we come upon a rainbow, or we're walking in the woods and you come across this waterfall and you feel like, or a sunset, you're like, this is just for me.
Right.
You know, it's like this very kind of personal, like you do feel like, and people often, even secular people, you know, it kind of draws them to some experience of God or belief in God. I was listening to these reporters. They were talking about the new telescope. It just slips my mind what the telescope's called, but it's like seeing almost to the edge of the universe. I mean, it's like 12.5 billion light
Right.
years. And this reporter, you know, oftentimes they're secular people. You know, she said she just wept when she saw these images of, you know, these stellar images, whatever, phenomenon, and I thought that was so striking. I think that's just something that's in our human nature, right? That we're moved so deeply.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because God puts it in our hearts, in our souls. He puts this longing for Him, and nothing besides Him can truly satisfy it, which is why when we encounter this divine beauty through His effects, such as through nature, through friendship, we ultimately, it's a reminder that we are made for God, we're made for heaven, and it's overwhelming to think about just how wonderful that total communion and satiation in God's infinite love would be.
Yeah. And you mentioned morality too, because there's a beauty to a moral act, a good
Right.
moral act that is also so moving. You know, even that on social media, you know, you might have a video of someone doing something for somebody else, you know,
Right.
and it could be powerful. Did you all study that?
Well, yes.
The beauty of moral acts.
St. Thomas, and I believe Aristotle as well, they talk about how what is most moving is human action. So seeing the goodness of actions is something that's very powerful to us, because we realize that it's a good that we are all called to.
Right.
And to see it in a heroic degree, especially like great sacrifices, it's very moving, because we know that that's true. We know no matter how much evil and sin we might fall into, at the end of the day, we have a conscience, we have a sense of this morality, and when we see it, it's very powerful, because we know that that is truly good. That can't be stamped out. We can't really become that warped that we can't recognize it, or at least it's very hard to get to that point. We always have that sense of right and wrong. So seeing moral action, Aristotle talks about how friends delight in seeing the good virtuous activity of their other friends. So when one friend sees their friend doing something good, it's very powerful to them, because they know that they are living a good human life. And to see someone doing something that's good both for them and for you, it's it's very powerful and really stirring.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was asking myself, like, what do I like? We're talking about movies eventually here. But I thought it was good just to talk about some of the philosophy behind beauty and things that make for a moving picture. I'll say, I was telling somebody that the other day. You know what I want to? I want to see something that moves me.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what I really want to see. I want to
Right.
go to the theater or watch something that moves me, that somehow speaks to me. And I was thinking, like, with a good moral act or something, oftentimes for me it's like somebody that sacrifices something, that love involves sacrifice, it costs them something. Or two, like when people will maybe help another person, lift them up. Like maybe a person who's got a certain strength
Right.
will extend his hand to somebody, and he doesn't have to.
Right.
And maybe it does cost him something. Maybe it just something that he notices and just decides to do something about it. And maybe he's got a lot of other stuff raging in his life that's uncontrolled. But in this moment, he does something noble.
Right.
And that always gets me. I don't know if that's, but yeah, I don't, do you identify with that?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
That's so one of in the film that I made, it definitely is one of the aspects that I wanted to portray, is that that human reaching out to help his fellow man and show that that love and thoughtfulness, and particularly with the main character and his desire to help other people. He's willing to help them write their papers, even though he could get in trouble himself, and even though that's not like the objectively academic right thing to do, he's willing to take a risk because he cares about them and he wants to help them, even though he knows that's putting himself at risk if he gets caught doing that. And similarly with his friends who just see his goodness, even though he's stuck in his own world, and try to reach out to him. It was important to me to convey that good-hearted people will try to reach out to others and to pull them out of their isolation and pull them out of their narrow way of thinking so that they can live a better life. And that's always a very powerful and loving thing to do, that we're called to do as Christians and as human beings.
What I find too, it's like the characters, it's like when they get selfish, it kind of, in one sense, maybe it gets predictable, maybe not necessarily so, but there's something that gets small about our world when we start getting self-centered.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we were talking about this earlier. Oftentimes movies, and they have to do this, I guess, to make it interesting. That you have the evil character that's got the best lines. He looks like $1 million. He dresses well. He's got the money, and I think about like old Columbo episodes, the television detective. It always took place in a wealthy place in Beverly Hills, or some wealthy thing,
right?
And that just kind of makes it interesting. If it's like a place with a lot of chaos and other kinds of struggle, it's like I don't know. For some reason it kind of loses its interest. But you gotta dress it up, because in of itself, taking somebody's life or acting selfishly, I think, is not compelling. But it's like you dress it up, it kind of can be somewhat attractive or give the illusion.
Right, and that's one of the philosophical elements that Aristotle talks about. So there are different types of logic. There's logical necessity, such as if you have a syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's like logical necessity. But there's another type of logic called like logic of rhetoric, or logic where you are merely inclining by fancy. And Aristotle talks about this in his Poetics. And there he says it's by just portraying action as good and desirable that we can convince others. So in films, you're not making a case of logical necessity. You're not saying A is equal to B, B is equal to C, therefore A is equal to C. It's not something that has to be the case necessarily. Rather, you're introducing a logic of moving the heart. And you do that by showing characters finding their happiness or losing their happiness based upon their actions. And you show ultimately the beauty and the peace that results from living a good life, or the misery that results from living a bad life. Now, philosophy can become skewed, warped, and untrue if you start portraying, well, see, this person's doing evil actions, and now look how happy they are. There's a movie called Me Before You, and it's about a guy who ultimately ends up taking his life, and it's kind of portrayed as a heroic thing, and that's where you really see that they're trying to warp the sense of good and evil, and it's really just by portraying the good and portraying the evil as what they are, rather than trying to confuse people and give them a false sense of good and evil by portraying it as something desirable.
Yeah. But isn't there even something real about portraying evil like in an attractive way? Because that's like what Satan does to us, right?
Right.
That is kind of our experience.
Right.
That, maybe people are drawn to steal because they can have money. And so you show them acquiring the money, and that looks fun to us in some degree, the nice car, whatever, the house.
Right.
But yeah, you have to show an honest filmmaker. I think maybe a Catholic filmmaker would show, the lack of joy, peace, and what it costs them.
Right. So like the external things might be there. They might have all the fancy toys and bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, it's important to show that interiorly they're not at peace. They're not happy, because that's true to life. No matter how much you try to tell yourself that living in vice is going to be fun and the way to go, it's really not the case. And that's where Aristotle and St. Thomas both are really in agreement, because Aristotle talks about how we have a specific nature, and if we live in vice, we're working against our nature. We're working against what our reason tells us. And since reason, as Aristotle explains, is like our highest faculty of knowing, if we're not reasoning well, we're not living well, because that's what we should be doing as human beings, is reasoning well. And if we're not reasoning well, we're not living well, and vice is acting contrary to reason, because vice is doing things that, if you just take an honest look at it, ask people who have lived this way, you realize it's destructive to your nature. It's just going to leave you feeling empty and miserable and unsatisfied. And only by living virtuously, only by loving truly, can we find that happiness. So it's important to reflect that in the stories that we tell, and particularly in the films that have those stories.
Yeah, I watched a BBC film on a true story about this great train robbery in the 60s, and it's really sad. I mean, everybody gets caught that was involved in it. And I went on Wikipedia and was reading about the true story, and it was very. It's just it tears up the families involved, and innocent people got hurt. And when you look at the reality of it, it's really ugly and kind of scary and very diminishing to the person. It's not like the person's growing into a big flourishing personality.
Right.
It's like you get small. And I always found that too. I've been watching some of the documentaries on like the mafia in this country, and oftentimes it seems to me, and even like the cartel stories in like Mexico, it's like some violent thugs,
Right.
that have achieved whatever power, but money, but it's really very uninteresting, and it's predictable, repetitive, and it's ugly.
Right. It's like we all know people can be evil. So where's the arc? Where's the turning point? Where's the growth? And that's ultimately, I think, what we all want as an audience. But there's such an agenda to fight against Christ and the truth in the media, so that any voice of conscience often gets stamped out. And there's a real war against beauty, truth, and goodness. And that's why it's so important to make films to bring back this beauty, truth, and goodness, because people, at the end of the day, they'll watch what entertainment's available.
Yeah.
And it's important to be giving them options of good entertainment, because ultimately those are the films that are really classics. Take the movie Casablanca, for example. The ending it has is because of the production code. The famous ending where, the main character Rick lets Ilsa go with Laszlo and escape, and he stays behind to continue the fight for the people in the war. And it's because of the production code that it had that dramatic ending, rather than him just choosing what he wanted to do for himself.
Yeah.
So that's and that's what makes it so memorable and lasting. Whereas films that portray evil as somehow good, they're not really going to be classics, because it's not in conformity with our nature as human beings.
Yeah, there's something to be said sometimes about, like, sometimes critics will pan something, but then it's popular among people, and I always feel like sometimes that's at play.
Mm-hmm.
That you very secular group of people out here, godless, whatever, you're just denying our common experience that we're moved by virtue.
Right.
You guys see this as corny. You guys see this as simplistic, but we want to see something where someone does the right thing, and maybe at cost and sacrifice and things, and just at the fact that there is a right thing and there is a wrong thing.
Right.
I feel like in our relativistic culture, we strip away that great drama of life, and some movies like wrestle with it. It's like they don't even have like a moral code. They seem confused, like in the presentation of their characters and everything. Like, what does a heroic character do? It's like, if you don't believe in anything, there's no heroism.
Right.
And there's no sense of real drama of good versus evil. And let's talk about maybe some of the artistic aspects of film and what that entails. And all these themes of like beauty and drawing people, I think to watch it, it has to have some artistic value just in of itself, right?
Definitely. Yes.
And that's a tricky business.
Right. So Aristotle talks about the importance of both delighting and instructing. So it's important to be entertaining, to make a film that's going to really capture the interests of the audience and keep them on the edge of their seat and wanting to watch and invested with the characters and good storytelling. And at the same time, to teach the audience something without them even realizing it, to just make the lesson, the truth, part of the story in such a seamless way that's subtle, but really remains in the minds and hearts of the people watching, to see the truth of what the characters are doing. My favorite film is The Fellowship of the Ring, and it always strikes me just to see the
Is that the first?
that is the first of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but all of them are great. But to see the heroism of the hobbits, who are the smallest, who would seem to be the least great and powerful of all the creatures, but the sacrifice and humility and love, which is such a Christian understanding of true power, which is having trust and humility and trust in God. To see that lived out, and the amount of sacrifice they're willing to make for the sake of the rest of Middle Earth, and to see all the human elements of the way that they interact with each other, their sense of humor, and their ability to find hope in the midst of darkness and insurmountable odds. It's something that's so universal and ever relevant and ever inspiring.
Yeah, like having to leave the Shire.
Right.
Having to go on exodus, to leave the comfortable, to go out and proclaim the gospel,
right,
as a Christian. And I think God so often calls us out of our comfort, to help people or extend ourselves. Or some tragedy happens in the family, you know, and you got to do things to care for people, whatever. That's such a powerful thing, because they describe the shires, you know, they smoke their pipes and have their pints or whatever. It's like a nice place. You know, the thing that actually blows me away that I just love is in the third one, you know, where the humble hobbits, you know, they work as a team, right? Sam and Frodo, and, you know, they need to be a team to get up to Mount Doom there, but that they fail.
Right.
That just, that always just, I can't get my head around it. You know, like why that is, that just gives me pause that he failed, and, you know, he wants to destroy Gollum along the way. Sam does, I guess, and Gandalf says he still might have a role to play. That there's some mysterious providence of God that's guiding this thing. That,
right.
And that he can use evil. You know, we can never act cruelly or unjustly. You know, and God works this out. And that, you know, Gollum bites the ring finger off, and the ring winds up falling into Mount, because he fails to throw it. The humble hobbit himself fails to throw it into the lava.
Right.
And it's such a great image of Christianity, you know?
That's very true. You know, it's very much portraying the aspect of divine grace, but in a way that is not preachy at all. It's not in your face. It's very subtle and woven into the story, but there you can see that there's a force working for good, even in ways that you don't expect. You know, you see right when you think that all is lost, that Gollum is actually an instrument of grace and of bringing to completion this heroic journey that Frodo and Sam couldn't do on their own.
Yeah.
And, you know, you definitely can see this is why it's important to have Catholic artists too, because they have the truth, they have the correct philosophy, and it just pervades all their storytelling. And Tolkien himself will say that Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Yeah. And that's why it's so important for young Catholic artists and Catholic artists in general to make these types of films and works of art that lead people to their ultimate joy, to their ultimate fulfillment, beatitude. And that can only happen by having an understanding of what makes us happy. That's the only way we can lead others to understand happiness and to find that joy and love and peace in their life.
Yeah, and I love that subtlety, you know, you mentioned woven throughout, because there's something, it's almost like when we have to connect the dots ourselves, and then like we're given like some room to kind of, you know, that it clicks in us.
Right.
Why that seemed like that's key to moving us. It's like not just when I'm told. You know, if somebody dryly tells me this, like that doesn't really move me. But if I'm kind of with it and then I get there myself,
right,
that is so powerful in storytelling.
That's very true. I heard a screenwriter once say, "Don't give the audience 4, give them 2 + 2." Because
that's good.
We want to work. We kind of want to work for the answer ourselves and internalize what's being said. It's learning without being taught necessarily. It's seeing lived experience, a metaphor for life, unfold before us on the screen or on the page of a story. And it's really about, like you're saying, connecting the dots ourselves, because it's in that way we're making it our own, and we don't feel like someone's talking down to us, telling us this is the way it has to be. It's recognizing an innate truth that we all have as human beings, that we share by our very nature. And when we see it in someone else, we see it reflected in our own lives. And then we come to a realization of, this is how I should live. I should help out my neighbor. I should be willing to give a kind listening ear to someone who's going through a rough time, and realize the impact that it may have in their life. A beautiful example of that is It's a Wonderful Life, just seeing the George Bailey and his whole realization of the dignity of every human life, the importance, how we touch others' lives, how all of his town would have been much more of a mess if it weren't for the the simple actions that he took to keep the community together, to give away his money, to give people housing, and all the countless small things that he did in order to help his friends out.
Yeah, that he was fighting the twisted, frustrated old man.
Right.
Mr. Potter.
Right.
Yeah. I love that theme, that it connects with something in our experience, that like we see the movie and it connects something to what we've experienced in life, and it's so powerful. I was watching this thing one time that it was these two characters were trying to decide what to do, and then this other character comes in and is telling us some experience he just had, and it became a metaphor for what they needed to do, this other character. And I thought I was just kind of blown away, because it was like some kind of sitcom or some kind of comedy. But man, when it's done well and it kind of crystallizes in you, like, hey, this is the right thing, or this is the wrong thing to do. That's so powerful, That's powerful.
Right.
It's like when you convict, the character reaches this conviction point.
Yes.
And that struggle. I guess we all know that struggle, to do the right thing or to have courage. And Lord of the Rings, right? He gives that great speech. There may come a day when the courage of men may fail.
Right.
Not this day.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I love speeches and movies, and like the importance of dialogue. I know on the show you talked about like these different aspects of that film has within it. That we could say like a literature aspect of the storytelling, the dialogue, the script of it, and the beautiful maybe musical score adds so much. Even an aspect of painting, if you think of a scene.
Right.
Right. What do you put in the scene of this
Right.
film? What objects are there, and what's the some, and like, well, just some other things, like just the dramatic ability, the acting ability of the characters, there, and then editing it all down, and what do you keep, what do you cut loose,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all that stuff. And it seemed like you can fail in different ways, but if you nail a few of them, you got a great film, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you hit them all, that's great, you
Right.
know. But I guess when I was talking to you earlier, I guess I was struck by just how powerful maybe one aspect of that is.
Yes. I mean, every part of it is important, but the most important is always the story, because that's the breathing core of the whole project.
Right.
And everything else supports it. So the actors that bring the characters to life, supporting the story, the editing supports the story, the cinematography, the painterly aspect of it supports what am I trying to convey in this scene with the shots. The music is also supporting the story. So the story is really the core that holds the whole thing together, and all of the other elements are there, acting sort of like support pillars and buttresses to make that project as good as it could be. So, it might not be quite as sturdy if you're missing a pillar, but it still might stand,
Yeah.
So it's kind of how films are.
Yeah, and I've been kind of mesmerized too. Sometimes when a movie just has heart.
Right.
I don't even know how you define that quality. Maybe oftentimes it seems like in coming of age films, sometimes when it just has a heart, and maybe it's that maybe the thing is, it's like it's connecting with something in you when you were maybe at that time of your life. And, I used to think, people would be nostalgic about something that they happened in their life. And even myself, look at it and say, well, that was just a thing, or just some event that happened. It wasn't like this hugely great thing in of itself. But the fact is that it moved me. Maybe it was like this character in a show I watched as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at it today and say, well, it was like a simplistic hero, one-dimensional, whatever. But as a kid, maybe it made you want to do good.
Right.
Maybe it wanted you to do the right thing. and that's a big thing, right?
Right, right.
And so I think that story and stuff is so important, was inspiring. But yeah, and why it touches us in ways it's kind of interesting. But what, like in editing, I'm kind of fascinated by this. I remember hearing an interview with this lady that worked with Steven Spielberg on Jaws.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
I haven't seen Jaws in particular, but I do
Yeah.
really love Steven Spielberg. He's
Yeah.
one of my favorite directors.
Well, there's this lady that was edited a lot of his stuff, and I guess they worked together on it. But I remember I thought she was so smart what she said about like the shark. You know, Spielberg built this mechanical shark. He wanted to show it off and use it all the time and everything. And, and she encouraged him to not like overuse it.
Right.
To keep some mystery to it.
That's true.
And it's like our imagination connects the dots to make
Yes.
this thing even scarier than what it
Right.
is. Right.
Right.
So that takes careful editing, right? That what do you cut, what do you keep?
Right. It's true.
How do you approach that?
Editing in particular?
Yeah.
To keep only as much as is necessary for the story. So anything that is not strictly necessary or helping in some way, get rid of it. It's we call it in the film world trimming the fat. Like anything unnecessary, cut it out. And in editing, it's important to have the right pacing for the type of scene that you're doing. So if it's an action scene, maybe a lot of quicker cuts. It's really like a mosaic of arrangement, because you have all these different clips, and depending on how you filmed it, what clips are available to use, and the type of scene, getting the rhythm of the different shots going, how long to hold it, how much that you show, and how the arrangement of those particular clips, it can really drastically change the whole feel of the film. So you have to have a strong sense of what you're going for from the start to the finish.
Yeah, and I know I heard like a comedy filmmaker, and this guy in the interview, in many ways he sounded arrogant, but I thought he showed some humility. That I forgot what they call it, but they would, before they released the film, they showed like test audiences. They would show scenes and say, and what worked, what did they find funny, and they would cut stuff that wasn't funny, because what he was saying was that we become unobjective. We lose our objectivity if it's our own work.
It's true.
And you're sitting there batting it around with your friend. You guys are laughing your head off about it. You show it to a group of people, they don't get it as much, right? And I thought that showed a humility, and maybe too, he just wanted to make money, and he knew he had to do this to make money. But I thought that was a powerful lesson. I mean, I say this because it's like in preaching too. You feel like sometimes you think something's great and it doesn't connect with people or whatever, and it doesn't work. But to have that humility, I guess, to take advice, to see what others think, have other people look at it.
Yeah, and it's very true that it's important to get someone who's not as closely involved with your film at a certain point to take a look at it, because when you're part of it, you like you said, you might be the only one that gets it or finds it funny. And for the best good of the project, you need someone else who kind of can take a step back and tell you what's really working or not. And a lot of times it gets hard in the editing room, because you got to let stuff go that you and the people that worked on it are the only ones who knew how much work it took to make, or what it involved, or just have a personal attachment to it. But it gets back to the whole aspect of beauty. Maybe the wholeness or the harmony would suffer because it doesn't really fit with the rest of the story ultimately, or it's unnecessary and it would be worth getting rid of, just moving it out of the film completely. So that's where you have to be able to cut your losses and be like, well, this will help the film be better, even though I know that I'm losing a scene that I didn't want to let go.
Yeah, and like, how do you be faithful to the original inspiration?
Right.
That you don't want to be arrogant or something, but be true to yourself and your own vision. And I think too, maybe maybe a gift God has given you, or maybe a charism, or maybe an inspiration that he wants this, and not to let go of that, in the film. That people, that question of like, I remember playing golf with somebody one time, and I never played much golf at all, but the guy was saying, well, just advance the ball, or just think about, some people get out there, they try to knock it out of the park, right? And you take up this big clump of dirt or something. But just think of it as, I'm just advancing the ball. Like to think of maybe shots, scenes, dialogues that advance it.
Right.
Some might be powerful, intense, emotional, and others might be seemingly kind of gentle,
right.
But yet it does something. It does move it forward.
Right.
I would think that would be hard to know. But
yes. So if it's not advancing the story, or if it's not advancing the plot or conveying some sort of emotional journey or some specific element that's really essential to the telling of the story or the wholeness of the film, then it's usually a good idea to cut it out.
Yeah. I like shots, like the videography, photography, cinematography. You talked about the chapel scene in your movie.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So it was really great filming in there. That's the old chapel. They're actually building a new chapel at Christendom. It'll be big. So we were filming in there, and I really wanted to film on a sunny day towards sunset because I knew the sun would be lower and would be shining in this golden light. And I really wanted to convey with that color the kind of heavenly beauty of experiences that we can all relate to. So we all have moments in our life where, whether it's nature or when we hear a nice song or whatever it is that someone gives us a smile that moves us, these moments of kind of contemplative beauty where our heart's really at peace and joyful. I wanted to convey that sense of true joy when the main character steps in and he's having a rough day, and he just hears this girl singing this beautiful Latin song, a part of the Ave Maria by Arcadelt. And the lighting there is really meant to serve that. And even the camera orbit at the beginning, kind of going from the side to the front, is supposed to kind of show that the moving nature of the music. And then you also, in that same shot, you convey the emotion, and also, as I go from the side to the front, convey that the main character is walking in the background. So it kind of serves a double purpose. And then just his kind of triumphant feeling at the end. You see his expression, and you see the light coming in. It's almost like there's a kind of halo glow. So lighting is a very important element in the cinematography. The camera movement, where I place the camera, it's all important and relevant to telling the story.
Yeah, and he's like, the guy walks in, sees the scene, hears the beautiful voice, sees the beautiful young woman, and he's like struck.
Right.
It's like, it's that, it's like the love, the experience, I guess, and attraction.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, it had like those great elements in it that I thought too, like with femininity too, and like you have like, a religious woman that has this reverence and doing something beautiful. It's just like, it just highlights some of the gifts of the feminine nature.
That's very true, and I definitely wanted to convey how her love, kindness, and just her femininity really is something that would draw him out of his more self-focused world into a world of grace and beauty, and it would open up an ability for him to really converse more with God and to see God's goodness and be a doorway for him into growing in grace and a self-sacrificial nature. And that's really kind of the first scene where we see the other side of him and see him coming out of himself a bit and getting away from just, I got to do my thing, I got to get ahead.
Yeah. It reminds me of what John Paul II talked about, like I forgot his words, but basically like the sexual attraction is like this impulse that come out of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
where you might And I never thought of it that way because it can be so easily turned into, selfish lust.
Right.
But, if it's not lust and just, like a sexual attraction that's not distorted, yeah, it speaks of our nature that we, as he would always say in Vatican II, said, that we find ourselves in a sincere giving of ourselves.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Because there's that definitely that sense of complementarity, that sense of finding our own, right, like what you're saying, that finding our own identity through communion with another, and the male-female dynamic is such a powerful witness of that, and according to God's design from the very beginning.
Yeah. And again, on the camera movement in that scene, describe that again. It was moving down the aisle of the church, or?
So at the very beginning, there was one orbiting shot, so where I started off as she's singing from the side, and then moving to the front, so orbiting to the front.
Okay.
And that both conveys the kind of the movement of music, sort of like you can imagine raising our voice to God and heaven, that kind of inner movement of the heart. And it also conveys, it also allows the audience to see just the main character coming in the back, because you go from the side to the front, so it kind of is a reveal of he's coming in the back as she's singing and having this realization.
Yeah. And you talk about like how the high camera angle maybe gives like a God perspective.
Yes. So the high camera angle can either convey a God perspective, showing the kind of seeming insignificance of the person in his landscape. It can show that they're weak or vulnerable, or it can show that God's watching down on them. And then low shots typically show a character in a position of strength. They look powerful. They're looming larger than life. So that's why camera placement is very important. If something is large in the frame in the foreground, it can show that object is very important. Alfred Hitchcock talks about this. The size of something in the frame designates its importance. So in a movie called The King's Speech, where you have the king preparing to give this speech to the whole country about the start of World War II, the English king, you really see how massive the microphone is, and it's like looming large in front of him, and it's like it shows from his perspective how intimidating it is, because he has a speech impediment.
Right.
It shows how intimidating being in front of the microphone is, and how kind of much that's controlling his life. So there are many different elements of cinematography and storytelling that really portray the message of the story and portray the emotion of that scene.
I wonder too sometimes if the higher angle too might kind of be kind of like a more objective feel to it. It's not like a close-up where it's very filled with maybe emotion of expression.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, because I noticed that I went to a wedding it was years ago. I went to like a 50th wedding anniversary, and they just were playing, like they had they'd scanned in, I guess, or something, these family photos, and it was just showing the life of this elderly couple, and it just struck me as so beautiful. They were playing like kind of 70s love songs and stuff, and I was kind of thinking, oh boy. But then it just moved me so much, because it's like when you step back and look at the reality, like when you're in it, it's the difficulty maybe of trying to find work, and provide for the family, and the house is too small, and the car, nothing has air conditioning, you're in the South. It's like, but when you take a step back and look at it, you see the home.
Right.
You see the car that we did these trips in, we went here and there, and it's like, it's just funny to me, because I think we often lose that kind of perspective on our life, that in a sense, God sees us from a distance, and he sees the big picture. He sees us from within as well. But it's like, I think we lose sight of the big picture, of maybe the greatness of fidelity, of sacrifice, that when you step back and look at it, that what was done.
Right. Yeah, the camera definitely too shows those different elements of either more objective or more subjective perspective, because when you're putting the camera in a scene, usually you're conveying one character's point of view, in some way or another, or you're just showing the scene more objectively from afar. You're taking it in as an audience without really feeling like you're experiencing it from one of the characters' perspectives. So that's another element that definitely comes into play in camera placement and movement.
And what about like the pushing in, like to the face of a character?
Right. So that conveys a sense of drama. It heightens the intensity. It could either be, for example, a character's having a realization, or it could be for a really dramatic, important statement. It's showing that what this character is saying is meaningful and important. So we're moving in towards them physically with the camera, or it could be a kind of slow dawning understanding of something new, but it's always there to heighten whatever the emotion is. Same thing with pulling back. If you're moving the camera away, it usually signals some sort of defeat, or possibly just revealing something new, some new information within the scene that you couldn't see from being closer.
And I wonder too, sometimes I find it so effective in a movie or something when they get closer, and it's not even, I know this actor is just showing so much emotion in their face, whatever. But maybe it's like forcing us just to focus and think about this. What is this character thinking about? How does this impact him?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of stirs something when you get connected to him, that is, I guess it does kind of make it personal, right? I guess,
Definitely. Because when you can feel, there's a difference between zooming in, which is tell the lens is zooming in from afar, but when you're actually tracking in on a dolly or a slider, is what they call the camera equipment, you're actually moving physically closer with the camera towards the character, and you can feel that kind of intimacy as you're right there in that space, right in front of what the actual actor, and hearing what they're having to say.
Yeah. And the last one we'll talk about maybe is how about music? That doesn't mean anything, is it, in the film?
Music, it's where to begin with that. It's such a immensely powerful aspect, and it's interesting how music can convey the subtext. So you have, like in dialogue, you have the text, like the actual words, what the words are, the meaning of the words themselves in the sentence of what a character says. But then you have the subtext, and the subtext is what the character means on a deeper level when he says something. So people don't typically say exactly what they're feeling, and the subtext is what's being implied, the deeper shades of meaning in a statement, what's really going on under the surface. And with music, a character might not be saying anything, but you can get a sense of what's really happening, the more complete truth of the situation, by what's happening in the soundtrack. You listen to the music and you're like, okay, this character might be saying something nice, but the music's sinister. What's really going to happen? Or the music goes from being really sad to all of a sudden you start to hear warmer sounds that are more vibrant and happy, and you know that some good news is coming, or whatever it may be. Alfred Hitchcock described that music says the things that words can't, and that's very true, in that sometimes a very powerful scene in a film, there might be no dialogue, you just hear the soundtrack, and it's expressing the spiritual heart of what's happening at that moment without necessarily being expressed in words, and it really takes the film to a whole nother level, just having music to accompany it and convey a really deep reality, because that's introducing a whole other art form and putting it in the service of a motion picture. It's really something quite unique.
So music says, how did you say?
Yeah, music says the things that words can't.
And what do you think is so powerful about film? Because we say this because we all acknowledge we don't read enough. We don't read the classics enough. And we're illiterate practically, even if we can read now, because we're drunk on Google and everything else. But I think in all that, sometimes though we just dismiss film as a true art. But
oh yeah, so I'm a 100% ardent supporter, as of film as an art form. And I think it is very much and can be a high art form because it incorporates so many other art forms. It incorporates music, it incorporates story, drama, painting, basically anything that you could think of in some way. I'm sure that you could find a way to incorporate it into a film. It's really quite amazing. Editing, which is a new type of art form of cutting and mixing stuff together that arose after the birth of cinema as a new phenomenon. So there's so much that you can do with it, and it's so powerful and immersive in a way, and immediate in a way that no other art form before it quite achieved. And that's why the pontiffs, they talk about how important it is to have good films, because they so directly just kind of bypass reason in a sense and get right to the heart and the emotions, and it's like you just subjectively experience the film, and you don't have to do a lot of work. You're just kind of taking it all in. It's like being somewhat in a dream, that you feel like you're right there with the characters as it's happening, and you don't have to work for it in the way that you do in a book. And a lot of people would probably say that that maybe books are better to read because there's more of an active engagement with it. But I think that film, since it combines so many different aspects of art, so many different types, so many different art forms, and the fact that it is kind of passive, I think that done well, it can be very beautiful and very powerful and very lofty in its own regard. And it's the fact that in film you're taking it in. It's all there handed to you in such a powerful, punchy package. I think that that's really what draws me to it, is the amount of power it can have to really move a person. And in books, it's a different type of thing. I think you need both. They complement each other, books and films. And I think if you really want to be a great filmmaker, you should read really the great books. And if you want to have a new perspective on books, I'd even say watching a film can help you to see a book in a new light. So they really do, I would say, complement each other, and they're each needed. And it's really neat to have this new type of art form, which is filmmaking.
And they can make such a lasting impression on us.
Definitely.
Like some stuff I'll watch and it's like I have no recollection barely of seeing the film, but other things just get into me,
right?
And it's like, and it leaves me with an impression of maybe a particular country or an event, a historical event, and so it's so formative in our culture today,
Definitely. And that's like, it's so often abused, which is the tragedy of it, because it has so much potential for good, and it's such a just tremendous vehicle of showing truth and beauty in the human experience and providing just a good leisurely activity. But it's just been completely hijacked so often that a lot of people can just dismiss it entirely. But it's important to realize that the potential on the flip side for great art is very much there.
Yeah. John Paul, thank you so much for coming, being on the show and talking with us.
Thank you, Father Mark.